welcome to another edition of T Watches a Scary Movie. I am T, and we're of course talking scary movies. I appreciate y'all tuning in. Remember, you can check out new premieres of episodes on our YouTube page, which is located right here. Yeah, right there. That's the link right there. Make sure to check that. Make sure to get subscribed because then you'll get alerts from when a new episode is going to premiere. Typically, we premiere new episodes every Wednesday night, and then anything like toy unboxings or hot chip challenges or anything like that, a lot of times we're going to debut those like Fridays or Saturdays too. I know we just did a recent toy unboxing, but that was due to a number of things going on. So new episodes every Wednesday. 8:30 p.m. premiere time. We decided to make them a little bit earlier so we can start our watch parties earlier. Which reminds me, we had a great time with our watch party last night. We did Better Watch Out, and we also did A Christmas Horror Story. And it was awesome to use some different platforms, have a few of y'all tuning in. I know, Natalie, you were there. Eric, I know you tuned in for a bit. Jen, you were there too. It was very cool to have y'all all there kind of checking it all out. We're always going to switch between platforms for these watch parties because some work better than other ones, like Prime and Hulu and all of that. And Netflix, they all have their own watch party apps. But like everything else, we have to go through a different way. So we're going to try a bunch of different stuff out there. But like I said, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube and then also subscribe to the Facebook group, which is going to be right here. And the reason why is because that'll give you the biggest alerts of when we're doing watch parties or contests or anything like that else going on. Which, by the way, we do have a contest running for the next couple of weeks, which we'll talk about at the end of the show. Now, this is our first edition of Holiday Horror. I told you that I'd spend the month of December talking about a few horror movies every single week. The lineup is set in the Facebook group. We are going to try to add a few more in. My good friend Corey had some good suggestions for me, so we're going to see if we can add some of those in here over the coming weeks itself. And obviously, if you can't tell, I am decked out in my nice Jason Voorhees Christmas sweater. I'll be happy to give y'all a link for that there. You can get these from right here. I ordered a few. It was a good deal. I ordered it specifically because a wrestler on Monday Night Raw was wearing one of these sweaters recently, and it was so awesome that I just had to have it. So yeah, there's that. But we are talking 3 holiday horror films tonight. We are going into Better Watch Out, A Christmas Horror Story, and then the original Black Christmas. All right, so we're going to get into all of those here. But let's get started with Better Watch Out. Now, I will attest that when this film was released back at the end of 2016, I had zero idea what it actually was about. I had seen online ads for it, and I saw a bunch of reviews on sites that I typically trust for what they say about movies, because they're really the sites I get all my info from. And a friend of mine had a Plex server set up that had the movie on it, and that was enough for me to check it out. It was very similar to the way I saw Eden Lake back in the day as well, too. Eden Lake's one of my absolute favorite horror films. And I saw it because IGN had just been posting the review and ads for it over and over and over that it finally wore me down to check the movie out. And that's kind of what happened here with Better Watch Out. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what it would feature because I stayed away from the trailers as well, too. And man, the movie tells the story of Ashley, who's played by Olivia DeJonge, who is moving out of town, but first has to fulfill one more babysitting job, taking care of 12-year-old Luke, who's played by Levi Miller. Now, Luke is clearly in love with Ashley and hoping to make something happen in their last night together. But when Ashley and Luke realize that somebody's watching their every move and trying to get into the house, the two are going to find out the lengths that a crazy person might go through to get something that they want. And I will leave it at that because if I get any deeper into the description of it, it'll give away some big plot points. And I won't lie. The first 20 to 25 minutes of this film are definitely making it out to be a different movie than what it is. You see it, and that's kind of the strength of the movie, is that for the first 20 to 25 minutes, it's going one route, and you think that's the way the movie is going to be. And then the film takes a hard turn because there's a pretty big twist in it, and it becomes a completely different kind of horror movie at that point. Now, in terms of scares, the film itself does set a few up, like in that first 20 the 25 minutes that's there that I said is completely different. But the only problem with it is that those scares become less effective after the twist and after you've seen the film like at least once at that point. Doesn't make it bad at all, but they're not as effective then because you kind of know what's coming after those first 20 to 25 minutes. Still good though. There's just not a lot of scares after that. Uh, Olivia DeJonge, who does a great job in the role of Ashley. It's kind of funny because her role, at some point, we've all seen a friend or we've been the friend who's after somebody that it's just not meant to work out. It's not meant to happen at all. And she does such a perfect job playing that role and trying not to break, the kid's heart because 12-year-old Luke is in love with Ashley. And Olivia DeJonge just does that so well to where she's trying to, not embarrass the kid and make him feel like crap, but at the same time, he's coming on pretty strong and you got to rebuff a lot of that to make sure it doesn't go in a direction that you really don't want it to go. And what's so interesting about it is that you can kind of tell that, like, if this movie came out in the 70s or 80s, that role might be completely different. Like, they might go with a different spin on what her character ultimately decides to do about all of it. And I think that's kind of a good thing that they didn't, because I like the way that this movie really played out. And she did such a good job in it. Levi Miller, who some of you might remember from that film Pan. It was like the Peter Pan prequel that came out a while back with him and Garrett Hedlund. That it really was not good. Matter of fact, now that I remember it, Rooney Mara played Tiger Lily in that film, and that was like a huge controversy, which is funny because Natalie and I were talking during the watch party last night about how the Mara sisters are overrated, and yeah, they really are. That role was not right for her in the least bit. But anyway, Levi Miller plays 12-year-old Luke. And what works out so well for that role is that Levi Miller was only 14 years old at the time, so he could still play the role pretty effectively. Because the idea is that, this kid like presents himself to be like super smart and super knowledgeable and things like that, but ultimately he's a pretty emotional 12-year-old kid who's not really in control of a lot of his thought process and thinking things out too well. And Levi Miller plays that fantastically. Nothing he does seems over the top for his character, whereas somebody else could have done it and it just would have seemed like weird, out of place, a little bit too much. But he actually makes it very fitting with the way he chooses to act the character out, honestly. And I love that about it because he made the film more enjoyable. I mean, Olivia DeJonge obviously is fantastic. She's really she's our eyes. She's the lead of the film itself. But Levi Miller does such a good job in the role. Now, there are some legitimate shocking moments in this movie. Like, there might not be a lot of scares later on, but there are some legitimately shocking moments in it. One that left me speechless, and I mean speechless the first time I saw it, involves a paint can. And I can't say anything more about it. What I will say is that my expression was kind of the same expression that the characters had in the film after it happened. Because did not see that coming. And presumably it ends the exact same way you think, that Home Alone paint can gag might actually go. So that itself is pretty shocking. And another one that involves a shotgun and a kiss on the cheek. And that one was incredibly sad and messed up, yet with the tone of the film, it was so fitting for what they were trying to do. And like the what followed up on that, like the immediate next like 2 to 3 minutes there, man, so good. So good. Just really fantastic. In regards to horror, like I said, most of those scary elements are set in the beginning parts of the film. After the film reveals its twist and the tone of it completely changes, the characters are still in a really horrible situation, but the tone of the movie doesn't exactly make it a scary situation. I'm not saying it's a comedy or anything like that at all, but when you see it, you'll kind of understand that it doesn't necessarily play itself up as like a typical horror movie at that point. And talking about the Christmas connection or influence, because obviously that's a big part of holiday horror here. Well, the movie is set during the Christmas season. All the houses in the neighborhood, they're all decorated, lights are up. There's even a plot point to where Ashley like interacts with like this big Santa this big Santa light that's like inside the house as well too. So it's a pretty big Christmas connection. Christmas does not feel the story, so like one can make that Die Hard argument. Whether like Die Hard's a Christmas movie, like yeah, it takes place during Christmas, but does that make it a Christmas movie? Because Christmas is not really driving it. I'm not gonna get into that argument. Die Hard is a Christmas movie. I will not argue about it. Argue with you about it. Don't try. Not gonna work with me. It's a Christmas movie. But better watch out. It kind of falls into the same exact kind of trap to where Christmas is very prevalent throughout it, but it doesn't actually push any plot points of the story forward at all. And so that may or may not kill it for you, because you'll think, oh, then it's just a horror movie that just happens to be happening during Christmas. Who knows? Who knows? But it's a great movie, nevertheless. I do recommend checking it out because it's a really, really fun watch. And it's a very, very brutal film, too. All the kills that really happen in it are they're very cringe. And I don't mean that in a bad way, just as in, like, it's unnerving, every single one of them that's in the film. There's not a single kill. And there's not a lot. But every single kill in it is very, very effective. So it's a great watch. Make sure to check it out. Better watch out. Our next film that we are discussing is A Christmas Horror Story. Oh, man. So I'm tired of telling you after, only 13 episodes how much I love anthology horror films. I love it, love it, love it, love it. It's fantastic. It's a big reason why Tales from the Crypt is just so high up there for me. It's just really so, so, so good. And the idea behind that is that, typically you're going to get a bunch of different voices that tell these stories. Different actors, different directors, different writers, even different crews, because it's really somebody who's making a mini movie. And it's so, so awesome the way that this movie worked out. Right off the back, those separate stories is one of the strongest points of this movie. We get 4 different tales and a wraparound story. And rather than the film taking an approach like Creepshow or like the original Tales from the Crypt, where all the stories don't have anything to do with each other, like there's not even a small connection between them all, and instead goes the route of like Trick or Treat, to where all the stories are happening at once, and the characters sometime will weave across one story to another. They won't have a significant role, but somebody from this story might appear in this portion of another story as well. And even with the minor connections there, it's woven so well that it's not jarring. Even if it does really force you to decide, like, okay, which story do you actually prefer? Because unfortunately, that's the downside of anthology stories. Not all of them typically end up being good. You usually have either 1 or 2 really bad ones in there. You usually don't get lucky to where every single one is actually that good. So let's talk about those stories. The first one is about 3 friends who break into their school to investigate a murder that happened recently. 2 students were murdered in the basement of the school, and these kids want to get to the bottom of what happened. Now, unfortunately, when they do go to investigate, they all end up getting locked inside this basement, as it is Christmas break, and that's kind of the Christmas connection there with it. But then they become the target of a vengeful ghost. Now, I'll be honest. This was the least interesting tale of the 4 that we saw. I mean, I enjoyed the idea of these kids wanting to find some truth, but the setup itself took entirely too long for the eventual payoff. And that might be different if the movie was staged like a Creepshow or a Tales from the Crypt, to where we just do all of one story, all of another story, all of another story. That would be perfectly fine in that case, maybe for this story. But the fact that we kind of go around back and forth between all the stories and even the wraparound over the course of the movie itself, it made it hard to stay invested in that one. The other ones don't have that problem, but this story itself, it became really hard to keep invested in it because of the fact we weren't getting all that information at one time. And I don't know. I almost felt like they should have added another kid or two to this group of friends as well. Because while I can't spoil too much because the movie only recently came out, the movie's only 4 years old, I can't spoil too much about it, but obviously we're going to get some deaths in that group of 3 kids. And the problem is that that's such a small cast, because there's not really ancillary characters in that story, that like we get too long of a setup, and then it all happens like really, really quickly towards the end of it. I honestly felt that if they added one or two more kids, that would have helped to pad out the story itself and make it more interesting, honestly. But with the small cast, we're just done over and done with so quickly. So I like the idea of the ghost and its motivations for why it might be hunting these kids, but unfortunately, we needed more kids, and it would have helped more if this story was just told start to finish all at once, as opposed to a piece here and a piece there. Okay, rarely really forgettable. The deaths weren't even really that good ultimately. So our second story talks about a family of three who goes to chop down a Christmas tree. Their father, who's actually a police officer who investigated the murder story that the kids in the first story were looking into as well, he's obviously dealing with a bit of trauma. He's high strung, he's stressed out, he's broken inside just because of everything he's had to deal with over the last year or so. And so trying to get a little joy back, him, his wife, and his son go out to go chop a tree down. They cross over into some prohibited land. So big sign says don't go over there, it's private property, and they go anyway. And of course, in a horror movie, that is a recipe for disaster. While trying to find the right tree, the son goes missing, and when they eventually find him and return home, the family is soon going to discover that the son they brought home might not be theirs. I really enjoyed this story. They built so much tension between the mother and the father, especially with everything that he's dealing with, that when things started happening with their son, you actually don't know if you feel too bad about it. And I realized that maybe we're supposed to, maybe that's what the director was going for. But honestly, I thought we were really supposed to hate the dad. I mean, it sucks he was in a terrible situation, but they don't really make him a likable character. So when things start happening, you start really wondering to yourself, do I really feel bad about what's happening to this family at all? And that's such a flip because the mother is super loving, super caring, and obviously concerned about everything that's going on. And, it's two opposite sides of like a coin at that point, because the dad is just this, he's not a terrible person, but he's just this mean, tough guy who's not really helping the situation at hand, whereas the mother's just trying to figure out what's going on and fix everything so her life can get back to normal. The idea that most of the action is confined to their small apartment works out so well. I love movies to where, we really are in a very small location the entire runtime. Like a Phone Booth or Buried, for example. Two very, very effective movies to where we're really in that one place almost the entire runtime of the film. And depending on what that place is, that really determines whether or not you think the film's all that memorable. And that apartment that they're in is so small and so confined and creepy that it really helps sell the story of what's going on. And not only that, but the monster of the tale, because I'm not spoiling too much. Something's going to happen. I'm not going to go all into it, but the monster of the tale is very, very creepy as well too. But they give good motivations to this monster, and the twist that we get towards the end of the story itself are kind of very fitting for what this family has been dealing with and what they have to go through to kind of end what they're dealing with too. And that brings us to our third story. The third story is about a family of four and their encounter with Krampus. Now when I saw this, keep in mind that the Mike Dougherty Krampus movie had only been released a year prior to this. So my knowledge of Krampus, whatever, as a whole was very, very minimal. I knew a bit before that movie had come out, but not as much as I do now. So my wife, who her family happens to be German, that's big for them. That's big in their culture, Krampus and the parades and stuff like that. So she gave me a lot of that information when we first went and saw it. But a lot of those elements don't really show themselves up in any of the representations in movie or in TV. They usually take one or two things, then they make up their own mythology around it. And that's okay, because with so many people not knowing the actual story, I don't think you have to be as accurate with it. But The one thing that typically like goes across any of these stories is that Krampus is usually hunting down, a group of people who are unappreciative about what they have around the holiday season. That they're looking at all the bad things rather than the things that could actually bring them together and show that love and stuff like that now too. And the idea here is that this family is going to visit a relative, presumably for money. We don't know for sure, but that's presumably what it's for. And the kids are obviously not happy about it. They'd rather be doing anything else with their time. Obviously, this is not a happy Christmas for them at all. And unfortunately, on their way home, because they're sent off by this relative, they begin to be hunted down by Krampus himself. Now, I love the story. The design of Krampus itself couldn't be further though from what we got in the 2015 film. He has the red jacket and the hood and everything, horns, claws, all that kind of stuff. And some of that is represented in this version of Krampus. But he's more like a pro wrestler is the best way I can say it. Like, and this coming from a guy who's watching wrestling for over 20 years at this point now, and honestly, that is the biggest way I can describe it to you. That like if Krampus in like the Krampus movie was an actual monster, then Krampus in this is like a wrestler with really, really well done makeup being done, because he's chiseled. And it's so weird to describe Krampus that way, but like, man, he was hunched over in the original film. Like he's kind of overweight, you think. Like he's everything a human is not. Whereas like this one, if it's supposed to be like the shadow of Saint Nicholas or whatever, now it's like, man, Santa's been working out, man, to have a shadow looking like that. Jeez. And again, it's not like the 2015 film is the ultimate representation of the monster itself, but the change is just quite jarring to see Krampus for the first time and then go to this design that they used for it. He's brutal and unforgiving in the movie, so that hasn't changed at all, and that was nice. He's working through his victims, not letting up at all, and that was really, really a joy to kind of watch the way they had Krampus operating. And it's such a simple story that it's really hard to kind of break down because there's not that much of different elements in here to really talk about. But there is a nice twist at the end of the story that adds a lot to the Krampus legend, which I'd be like, man, I would not mind if that popped up like in a different movie. Not a sequel, obviously, to this or anything, even though I wouldn't mind a sequel. But as in, if they brought that plot element into another Krampus film or TV show or whatever, that would be so sick to see that. So that's our third story that we have, which brings us to our fourth and the best of the four stories in the wraparound that we have here. In our fourth story, Santa Claus discovers that all of his elves have been turned into zombies. As he attempts to save Mrs. Claus and escape the North Pole, he'll have to fight off ultimately against his nemesis, Krampus. So, that's kind of our connection to the third story, is that we're basically Santa's fighting the monster from the third story. And let me start by saying I fucking loved this one so much. It pretty much starts the film. Yeah, we have the wraparound, but it's kind of the start of the film, and it's fitting that it's the end. Now, Santa Claus is played by George Buza. And that name might not sound familiar, but if you remember, the very popular show back in the 90s that you might have heard of was a cartoon called X-Men. You might have heard of it or seen an episode or two. Santa Claus here was the voice of Beast in the original X-Men cartoon, which is so freaking awesome. So right off the jump there, it's so cool. And Santa is a badass in this. He's gruff. He's tough. He's got a ponytail. He's got this bitchin' staff that he's using. And he knows how to fight. Santa knows how to pick up his dukes and hand out some holiday cheer. And I kept wanting the movie to go back to this story because, man, every time we get to see Santa fighting zombie elves, it's fucking awesome. Now, like a lot of these stories, there's a pretty big twist at the end of this that wraps directly into the wraparound. Which our wraparound actually features William Shatner as a DJ who's popping up throughout the film to warn like the people listening in about staying safe from some sort of nearby disturbance. And that ties directly into this Santa Claus story. Now, there's really like there's not much more to the story, so that's why there's not a lot to say about it, because it's really just Santa killing zombies at that point. But the movie is damn good. I could watch a solo movie about this Santa Claus, beyond the other ones. But outside of the first story, the movie feels like a pretty complete film. The Christmas connections, we've talked about them. All of our stories take place during the Christmas season. The first story takes place during Christmas break. The second story about the family and getting the tree and the kid, they're getting a Christmas tree. That drives what happens. The third story is directly driven by Chris Krampus. And then our fourth story features Santa Claus. So everything makes a lot of sense. Now, as for scares, there's some pretty intense imagery in all four of these stories, but I didn't really find it that scary, and I don't know if that's necessarily criticizing the film, because I don't necessarily need to be scared when I watch a horror movie. I know that's the point of it, but as you get older, things start scaring you less, and it's like, that's just a good movie. I just enjoy watching the movie, Even films that once scared you that aren't scary anymore, like The Exorcist, that's normal midday watching now. That's not even that scary. But there's some pretty intense imagery in all of them. And even beyond that, there is so much enjoyment in this film. So make sure to check it out, A Christmas Horror Story. And that brings up our last film, the original Black Christmas. Black Christmas 74. Now, if you looked at the schedule, you know that I'm going to be watching all three Black Christmas movies. And I've seen this one once. Which is kind of shocking, because you know how I feel about slasher films, and I love them. They're fantastic. But not only that, but this film influenced so many slasher films. So the fact that I've only seen it one time before is kind of saying a lot about how I might feel about it. A group of sorority sisters begin receiving threatening phone calls. And not too long after that, they begin to be stalked and murdered during the Christmas season. Now, the story itself is actually inspired by an urban legend all of y'all have heard at one point or another about a babysitter and a man upstairs. Babysitter keeps getting calls, man saying, have you checked the children? Are the children okay? Stuff like that. Calls the cops. Cops say, hey, calls coming from inside the house. Cue the laugh track. Slap hands, we freeze. Next week on Family Matters. But you all have heard that before. They even made a pretty direct film about it back in the old days. I don't remember. Actually, it might have been When a Stranger Calls. I think that's what it. I know there's the new one with Camilla Bell in it and Lance Henriksen. But I actually think that's a remake of the original film. And technically, Black Christmas is an adaptation of that story. The girls are getting threatening calls. The police eventually track and discover the calls are coming from inside the house. And the cast here is actually pretty stacked in terms of a horror film. We get obviously Margot Kidder, who, man, I love Margot Kidder. Yeah, she was such a tremendous actor, She was really, really good. And whenever you see like some of the older stuff she did, like this or Amityville Horror or even Superman, or Twilight Zone or anything like that, it's like, damn, like you had a pretty strong pedigree in your entire career. But Margot Kidder's in it, Olivia Hussey's in it, John Saxon, Nick Mancuso, they're all in this film. There's a few other ones as well, but it's a pretty stacked cast, honestly, of people who are big in the genre. But I'll be honest, older slasher films are harder to enjoy in this day and age, just because anything before the original Halloween, it's like they were still working it out. And I get that makes it hard to kind of hold that against them. Like, you were still working out what a slasher film was, so sorry, but you suck. But unfortunately, that's kind of the case. Like, I can't help the fact that I didn't start seeing slashers until the early 90s. And anything that was out at that time, we're talking Chucky, Freddy, Jason, Michael Myers. Like, everything's kind of based off of that. So anything that's not those guys, it's hard. Not that I don't enjoy it. I enjoy quite a lot of old slashers. But this one was kind of hard to get through, honestly. They give us a large cast of girls. And that's great, because then we get cannon fodder, obviously, between them. But the problem is that most of the girls outside of the lead character, Jess, who's played by Olivia Hussey, they're all insufferable. We kind of want to see them die. So we're not rooting against the killer. And while, yeah, it is popular these days to root for your killer in horror movies, you're not really supposed to do that with like the older films. And we were definitely rooting for the killer, I feel, in most of Black Christmas. What they did do a good job of, though, is setting a precedent for slashers that we have to find out who the identity of the killer is. We've talked about it before that there was a number of slashers back in the 70s and the 80s where they straight up tell you who the killer is right away. For example, Prom Night. We know right from the jump who the killer is. They tell us in the first 10 minutes of the movie. Slumber Party Massacre is another one. We know who the killer is right away. There is no mystery about it. But like in those cases, it works. But one of the best things about a slasher is trying to figure out who's behind it all and why. Motive is always fun, at least till we get to Scream. Then we don't have to worry about motive at that point. And we get a number of red herrings in the movie that all seem very possible. The biggest one is our lead character, Jess, her boyfriend, Peter. Jess is pregnant and is planning on getting an abortion. Peter's dead set against that. He wants to have the baby. He wants to get married to Jess. He wants a family. He wants a life with her. And a smart person would tell you, well, then there's no way the killer is Peter. Because if he wants the baby and he wants to be with Jess, then it doesn't make sense that he tried to kill her. Because it's not a case of, well, if I can't have you, nobody will have you. It's not the kind of guy they set Peter up to be. So while that's the most obvious like red herring in the movie of who the killer could be, if you're wise, you can tell right from the jump it doesn't make a lick of sense that it would turn out to be Peter. Like, he should be immediately eliminated once we kind of get that bit of story exposition. But the film keeps that idea up until the very end, and unfortunately, from a story perspective for our lead character Jess, who makes it through the film, Peter is not the killer. We never really discover who that killer is, and that is unfortunately one of the better things about at least the 2006 Black Christmas, as we get a little bit more insight on it. But it kind of sucked that we really didn't get more on this here. Instead, it just ends up being, you know, this crazy person who we can assume a few things about, but ultimately we really can't know. And there are some inventive kills in this movie. I mean, you know, one involves their house mother and a crane hook, and Margot Kidder and a unicorn horn as well. But in terms of scares, that's really going to depend on how much you choose to immerse yourself in this movie. If you commit to what you're seeing and what you're watching, it's going to be great. But if you don't, then you're not really going to find anything to enjoy in this. I don't like the movie. I really, really don't. But if I'm being honest, it's absolutely my least favorite of the two Black Christmas films I've seen so far. Because I have not yet seen the 2019 one that came out, you know, this time last year. So I got to go back and watch that. That is on the list. But yeah, that's Black Christmas 74. And that's going to do it, folks. That is our 3 movies that we are talking about here. Again, we have Better Watch Out, A Christmas Horror Story, and Black Christmas 74. Now, you know we have more coming every Wednesday this month, but I'm also still going to try to fit in some non-holiday horror ones as well. For all you Maximum Overdrive fans, we're going to see if we can get some vehicular horror sometime here in the next 2 weeks as well. Now, really quickly, again, I want to say that I appreciate all of you who tune in and watch, whether it is through the YouTube channel or it's the Facebook group. Thank y'all so much. If you saw earlier this week, we did a fun opening with Krampus on the mantle. Krampus on the mantle, whatever. And I'll actually be giving one of those away. So if you want to qualify, all you have to do is subscribe to the YouTube channel, find that unboxing video, and then follow the instructions to qualify. Because I am going to give one of those Krampus on the mantles away, but you got to make sure you're following what you need to do in order to get it, okay? So I will be back next week with Silent Night, Deadly Night, Black Christmas 2006, and Krampus. So make sure to tune in for that. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube page. Make sure to subscribe to the Facebook group. Like, comment, and share. And we, of course, still have more scary hot eating challenges that are going to be coming up soon. If you'd like to participate, make sure to reach out. We'll set something up. I'll buy you the chip or whatever we end up eating, and I'll make sure that gets to you so we keep it safe. Anyway, folks, that is my time. I am T. We've been talking scary movies. Stay scared.